Chapter 32, Solar Wind. I walked fast through the kitchen and out into the back garden, my hand flapping. The general synopsis is 1800, issued by the Met Office. Fitzroy, mainly northerly, 4 or 5, becoming variable, thundery showers. I did my pacing, counting the strides it took to get from one side of the back garden to the other. 12.5 strides long, 7 across. I ducked under the line of dry clothes, grabbing onto a sheet. I left a grubby stain. My fingers were still black from going through the phone book earlier. Eye of the Needle Solutions. That's what I needed. A solution for the impossible. How you get through a needle point. How you disappear from a sealed pod. I thought of the girl on the motorbike, the pink sleeve in the photo. I thought of Dad's razor blade. I thought of the strange man, and the lady saying how he was fired, and him saying we should find the bird with the dark hair, and I thought of what Aunt Gloria had said earlier. If brains alone could bring Salim back, yours would do it, Ted. I held my hands over my ears and shook out my head. My brain felt like it was overheated, going into meltdown. I paced the garden and recounted my steps, only this time the number came out wrong. 11.5 strides instead of 12.5, so either my legs had grown in the last few minutes, or the universe had shrunk, instead of expanded. Whirr! I went like the Earl's Court motorbikes. I looked up at the sky. Evening. High strata cloud, fresh southwesterly, but air pressure falling. One of Dad's shirts on the line flapped against my head. The wind was picking up. I walked over to the garden shed and kicked it a few times. I'm not a philosopher, I'm a meteorologist, but I believe in meditation. Buddhists believe that if you empty out your head, that's when you find enlightenment. Kicking the shed is a good way of emptying out your head. It's like jumping on a trampoline. You kick or jump or kick, and eventually all the thoughts march out of your ears like a line of toy soldiers heading for the edge of the table. You're left with nothing, the empty nothing I told Salim about, which is frightening and lonely, but simple and clear. I shut my eyes and imagined a vast, silent void. I kept up the kicking. By the 87th kick I was empty inside, and a kind of solar wind arrived in my brain, a storm of charged particles rushing through my head like lightning, giving off strange flashes of coloured lights. A picture formed. It was like the aurora borealis, burning in my brain. It sparkled so hard it hurt. The pattern I'd half glimpsed earlier that day flooded back. But this time it didn't vanish. I caught it. I hung on to it. I made it freeze like ice. Then I knew. Not where Salim was, but how he'd vanished like he had. Chapter 33. The Sound of the Storm. When you try to talk to people in the middle of a storm, they can't hear. They can't catch your words for the sound of the storm. Thunder, rain and wind. And the things the storm moves, leaves, roof tiles, rubbish. I came in from the garden, 87 kicks of the garden shed wiser, but I couldn't make myself heard. Dad was just coming in from work. Mum was still sitting on the stairs. She ran to him before he took off his coat. His arms went around him. Her arms went around him, and she put her head on his shoulder. "Oh, Ben, I'm so glad you're home." "Faith, love, what's wrong? Has there been bad news?" "Not since we spoke earlier. The press has been here, twice. Glo's been terrible all day. This afternoon she had a panic attack. She couldn't breathe. I called the doctor. He gave her a sleeping pill. She's upstairs, flat out. The first proper sleep she's had since Salim went missing. Then the kids just took off somewhere without asking, and Ted left a note about going swimming. Imagine! He lied, Ben. I didn't know what to do. I thought we'd lost them too. Then Rashid went out to walk the streets. He said he was going mad sitting around, waiting. And just now the kids came back. Oh, Ben, the relief. They came in the door, and Kat and I, we had a row. So what's new? A terrible row, Ben. I nearly hit her. I came this close. She held out her finger and thumb a centimetre apart. Then she started wailing again. Dad said shh, but she didn't stop. I stood a couple of metres away. "Dad," I said. He didn't answer. "Mum," I said. She didn't answer. I waited and tried again. Dad! Mum! Mum looked round and swallowed. She said, "Oh, Ted, there you are. Can't you go upstairs and read a book or something?" "But, Mum, I've worked out." "Shush, Ted," Dad said. "Now isn't the time." The words were hard and short, not like Dad's voice at all, and Mum started crying again, so I went upstairs. In my room, Kat lay face down on the lilo, her fist clenched up and pressed between her eyebrows. I noticed that my alarm clock was on the floor, broken into bits. That was the smashing sound I'd heard earlier at tornado touchdown time. "Kat," I said. She shook her head, her eyes scrunched up. A tear slipped out and trailed down her nose. She didn't wipe it away. "Kat, I think I've got it." She moaned. "The theories. The 9 theories. I think I know the right one." "Oh, Ted, you and your theories." She grabbed a pillow and buried her head under it. I went up to her and tapped her shoulder. "The theories, Kat," I said. She looked up from the pillow. "Go away," she said. "Kat," I said. Then I added, "Sis," because she likes me calling her this, as she says it makes me sound normal. But this time it didn't work. "Ted, I don't want to know. Go to hell." "Kat." She took the pillow and banged me on the shoulder with it. "That's to stop you looking like a bloody duck that's forgotten how to quack," she said. Then she threw herself down and sobbed. Next I crept into Kat's room, where Aunt Gloria was. "Aunt Gloria," I whispered. But Aunt Gloria was fast asleep. This was not surprising, as Mum had said she'd had a sleeping pill. Sleeping pills make your brain waves calm down into a sleep pattern. I would like to try one, not so much because I have trouble sleeping, but more to see if my brain, with its different operating system, would respond. Aunt Gloria lay on her back diagonally across the bed, her foot hanging over the edge and the duvet crooked. Her mouth was half open, her breathing loud and low. Her eyelids were a bruised colour, a purple smudge. I couldn't have woken her, even if I tried. I was about to creep out again when I saw Kat's copy of the Tempest face down on the duvet. Kat, like Salim, had been studying it at school. Had Aunt Gloria been reading it too? Salim had said he'd acted in it and that it was right up my street. I realised now that he'd meant that I would like it because it was named after a dramatic weather condition, and weather is what interests me most. I picked it up, sat down at Kat's desk and began to read. First, there was a long list of people. This is how plays always start. The author tells you who is who and how they are related to each other, and it is called a cast of characters. This one had a lot of men and some strange-sounding spirits, and a female called Miranda, who I remembered Kat saying was a dish rag. Then I read the first scene. I didn't understand it because the language was almost as hard to understand as French, which is my worst subject at school. I read it again, and a third time, before I worked out that it was about a ship sinking in a storm. That was as far as I got, when a groan behind me made me look up. "Salim?" It sounded as if Aunt Gloria was speaking in her sleep. "Salim?" I crept over to the side of the bed, the Tempest open in my hand. "No, Aunt Gloria," I said. "It's Ted." She looked at me. The whites of her eyes were bloodshot, which was what happens when you have been crying or staring too hard for too long at something. "Ted," she said. She saw the copy of The Tempest and smiled. "I was reading that just now, to help me sleep. Salim was in it last term." "I know, Aunt Gloria, he told me." She smiled. "The dashing young prince. Ferdinand. My Salim." She turned onto her side and curled up, crying. I stood there in silence, not sure if I should put my hand on her shoulder or do nothing. After a while I realised she'd gone back to sleep. I put the play back down by her side and left the room. Out on the landing I stood and listened to the house. It was quiet. I wondered why nobody could hear me when it was so quiet. Then I started to hear the sounds houses always make when the people in them are silent. Boards creaking as they settle onto the foundations, pipes gurgling inside the walls, central heating humming. I clung to the banister at the top of the stairs. I heard something else, my heart thumping, blood pumping in my ears, the distant tick of the clock in the hallway downstairs. It was time. Time had a sound too. I'd never heard it before. I put my hands over my ears. It was deafening. Mum appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She came up silently and gave me a hug. I squirmed. Ted, she said, I apologise to you, but especially to Kat. Mum, I said, I've worked it out. She patted my head as if I'd said nothing, went past me and knocked on my bedroom door. There was no reply, but she turned the handle and went in. She shut the door behind her. I heard her voice, soft and sad, coming from the other side. Then I heard Kat's. I couldn't hear their words. I went on downstairs just as Rashid let himself in through the front door with a spare key. He stood in the hallway looking ahead with no expression on his face that I could decipher. Uncle Rashid, I said. Sorry? He said. Oh, hello, Ted. Dad came out of the living room and greeted him by saying, Do you want a can of beer? And they went into the kitchen, just as if I didn't exist. Then I went into the front room. I went over to the mantelpiece and picked up Detective Inspector Pierce's card. I stared at it. I'm no good at telephone conversations, but I remembered how she'd smiled at me when I told her about Salim getting a call on his mobile and said how she wished her officers had half my brains. She'd listened then. I normally only use the telephone about once a week. This is because I have nobody I need to telephone, but sometimes Mum makes me call the Directory Inquiries number as she says I need the practice. Today I was about to use the telephone twice, which was far more practice than I wanted. I sat on the sofa, on top of my flapping hand. I picked up the phone with one hand, and then I dialed Detective Inspector Pierce's number. Chapter 34. Smoke. Time passed. Kat and Mum came downstairs arm in arm. I hadn't seen them like that in a while. I was able to deduce from their body language that they had made up, and this made me pleased because it showed how much better I was at getting and reading body language. Then Aunt Gloria came down in her dressing gown. Her lips were flat and her eyes empty-looking, so I didn't know what her body language was saying, and I was less pleased. Dad and Rashid went out to fetch an Indian takeaway for everyone. They returned with a dozen foil containers of steaming food. I had 2 samosas, a chicken biryani, and most of Kat's chicken korma, which she couldn't finish. Dad got most of the way through a prawn boona. As for the others, mounds of food got left on their plates. Aunt Gloria nibbled on one side of an onion bhaji for about half an hour. Mum's fork went round her plate, pushing the same chickpea. Rashid sipped a beer and stared at his food without even starting. How was work? Mum said to Dad. He shrugged. Quiet. I was out Peckham way today, on another job. Then nobody spoke. I wanted to tell them what I knew and all about my conversation with Detective Inspector Pierce, but she had told me to say nothing for now in case people started to hope. She explained that normally hope is a good thing, but if you hope a lot for something and it doesn't happen, then you are disappointed, and it's called being let down. I asked her if being let down was like coming back to earth with a bump if you let air out of a hot air balloon too fast, and she said yes, it was like that. Then that started another train of thought, that hot air ballooning was something I'd try one day, but only when the weather was set fair, and I'd bring instruments for measuring air pressure and temperature, make recordings, and Houston calling planet Pluto, Dad said. I looked over at Dad. This is what he says to get my attention when my thoughts are far away from where my body is. Pass the rice, Ted, he said, smiling. I passed the rice. There was silence again. It was as if everybody had decided that Salim was not to be mentioned. Kat kept winding a brown curl of hair around her finger. Aunt Gloria lit a cigarette but forgot to smoke it. I watched it burn away and followed the trail of smoke through the air as it burned. It was deflected to the left over her shoulder, although there was no window open and no air in the room. This made me think of the Coriolis effect again, and how it is invisible, but can make things change direction. Aunt Gloria, I said. Shush, Ted, Mum said. No, let him say what he wants to say, said Aunt Gloria. Why are you lighting cigarettes and not smoking them? I asked. Ted, said Mum, give your Auntie Glo a break. Auntie Glo gave a tiny smile. I didn't even notice I'd lit one, Ted. I tell you what, when this is over, if he comes back, I'll give the damn things up. That's a promise. She sat back, tears going down her face, and took a long drag. I wasn't sure if she was crying at the thought of having to give up cigarettes or because Salim might not come back safely. The room went quiet again. "If he comes back safe," she repeated, which was how I knew she was crying because of Salim, not the cigarettes. I carried on eating. When I put my knife and fork down, I listened to the silence. I heard the clock ticking again. Then I felt blood pounding in my ears. It was like railway wheels going round in my head, trains of thought running out of control, couplers snapping. The boy on the slab, the boy on the train. Mum made a pot of tea. I heard a spoon rapping against china as Dad stirred in his sugar. Salim or not Salim? "I can't stand it any more," Aunt Gloria said. She leaped up. "The waiting, I can't stand it." Mum reached out and put a hand on Aunt Gloria's wrist. "I know, Glo, sit down." "You don't know. You can't know. Kat and Ted, they've never disappeared. Not like this. Not for more than 2 days. And nothing. No news. Nothing." "Calm down, Gloria," said Rashid. "How can I? You're all sitting there. You're all looking at me, and I know what you're thinking." "Glo," Mum said, "don't you start. I overheard you today on the phone to Ben. You think Salim's run away, don't you? You think he's hiding from me, don't you? Why don't you just say it?" "Glo," Mum said, "go on, say it." "Maybe if the choice is between Salim being kidnapped by some evil person or he's hiding somewhere, unaware of how much distress he's causing you, then yes, I do think. That is, You're saying it's my fault, that I've brought this on myself." "No, Glo, not that. But maybe going to New York for Salim, that was a step to—" "It wasn't. It wasn't," Aunt Gloria cried out. "I know my own boy. He wouldn't do this to me. I know." She turned from the table. The sleeve of her dressing gown caught her plate and an onion bhaji went flying. Her shoulders shook. "I'm going to go out there and find him. I am. I don't care if I have to walk from one end of London to the other." She staggered through the door into the hallway. Mum jumped up. "Glo, don't go. I didn't mean—" From where I was sitting, I could see Aunt Gloria opening the front door, fiddling with the handle. "Get lost, Faye," she shouted. "Stop her, Ben," Mum said. "She's out of her mind." Dad, looking dazed, got to his feet. Kat got up too. Rashid sat still, his mouth hanging open. Just as Aunt Gloria opened the front door, a siren came welling up right outside. Lights flashed. There were voices in the front garden. People moving. Confusion. A chair fell over, and Rashid rocked on his chair and started groaning. "Please, God, please, no, no," he said. A bad feeling went up my esophagus. The police had come, just when Detective Inspector Pierce had told me then when they would. But I hadn't expected the siren, and it didn't sound like the sirens did when I played ambulances with Kat. It sounded real and near and loud and bad. The boy on the train, the boy on the slab, Salim or not Salim. I put my hands over my ears. The general synopsis, 1900. Low Fitzroy, 1008, expected just west of Rockall. Chapter 35. The boy on the train again. Detective Inspector Pierce entered the house, leading Aunt Gloria by the elbow. She guided her into the kitchen and sat her down. "She looks like she needs a warm drink," the inspector said. "She's in a state of shock." Kat poured a cup of tea. Rashid got up to give his place to Aunt Gloria. He sat her down and stroked her hair. Her hands shook and her lips chattered together as if she'd just come in from a snowstorm, although it was warm and humid outside, about 18 degrees. "Is there news?" Mum said. Detective Inspector Pierce didn't reply until Aunt Gloria had taken a sip of her drink. I felt Kat's hand in mine, gripping hard. Inspector Pierce shook her head. "Some news, but neither good nor bad. It's more an update, courtesy of Ted." Everybody stared at me. "Ted?" said Mum. "Ted?" said Dad. "Ted?" said Kat. I didn't say anything. I looked at the kitchen floor. "Ted has worked out what happened to Salim the day he disappeared," Detective Inspector Pierce continued. "His conclusions agreed with where our inquiries were heading, but I have to say he got there before us." "Ted!" Kat said again. Her mouth was open and her jaw hung down. "We followed up on what Ted told us, but as yet we still don't know where Salim is." Aunt Gloria moaned and put her head in her hands. But we know who the boy on the train was. Salim? Said Mum. Detective Inspector Pearce's hands went apart. Not Salim, she said. This is the boy on the train, here. Another woman police officer in uniform came into the room. With her was a boy about Salim's age, but not Salim. He was half hiding behind the officer's tall body. He was chubby around the cheeks, dark-haired and Asian-looking, although it was hard to see him properly as he wore the hood of his sweatshirt over his head and part of his face. "You!" Aunt Gloria gasped. "Hello, Marcus," I said. Chapter 36. Weather Detection. I suppose you want to know how I worked it out. Or maybe your brain works on a different operating system from other people's like mine, and you've worked it out too. I've done nothing but think from 2 minutes past noon on the day Salim disappeared, Monday, to when I'd phoned the police at 18:04 Wednesday. That's 54 hours and 2 minutes of thinking, if you count sleeping time, which I do. You go on thinking in your sleep. I'd gone over the 9 theories again and again. We discounted theories 1, 2 and 8 by checking them out. Salim couldn't have stayed on the pod for another ride, nor had my watch gone wrong, nor could he have hidden under somebody's clothes without our noticing. Kat had convinced me that Theory 9, that Salim had never got on the pod in the first place, was wrong. Theories 5 and 7, spontaneous combustion and the time warp, Kat had dismissed out of hand. I hadn't, but there was another reason I'd finally agreed to cross them off, one I hadn't told Kat. I'd counted the number of people who'd got on the pod, 21, and I counted the number who'd got off, 21. I realised that if Salim had spontaneously combusted or slipped into a time warp, only 20 people would have got off. That left theories 3, 4 and 6. 3 and 4 both depended on us having somehow missed Salim when he got out. I told the police there was only about a 2% chance of our having missed him, which meant there was a 98% chance that Salim had emerged from the pod in disguise. At first we thought this theory unlikely, but the more I considered it over the 54 hours and 2 minutes, the more possible it seemed. When we went up in the London Eye with Dad the next day, I'd noticed a time when you could put a disguise on with nobody noticing. It's when everyone turns to have their souvenir shot taken. Everyone faces one way for almost a full minute until the flash goes off. So I'd given the souvenir shot of Salim's pod that Kat bought another look. I kept coming back to the pink sleeve, the one that we thought was the girl in the pink fluffy jacket at the back of the picture, waving at the camera. I don't know when I first realised. Maybe it was the 18 pictures that Kat took of our washing line when she was using up Salim's film, with the sleeves of sweatshirts, jumpers and blouses waving in the wind, or maybe it was the way I'd seen Kat struggle into her fur-collared jacket the morning she'd rushed out to get the photos of the strange man enlarged. The sleeve in the souvenir shot was not somebody waving, it was somebody changing. A pink sleeve, waving or drowning, waving or changing. It depended on how you looked at it. The girl in the pink fluffy jacket was Salim's accomplice. They'd swapped identities in the pod. A wig, a jacket, sunglasses. That was all it needed. And I remembered Aunt Gloria saying how Salim was a practical joker, not a theoretical joker like me, but a practical one, which means he actually carried out his jokes. Maybe this was a practical joke on a big scale. For a brief period I wondered if Salim had a girlfriend who nobody had mentioned, maybe a girlfriend even Aunt Gloria didn't know about. A factor X in the equation. The Coriolis force, the thing that had deflected Salim off his course. Then, in the 54 hours and 2 minutes of thinking time, another possibility occurred to me. Marcus, the Packy boy, the Mosher, the boy in the Tempest. Salim said a mate had called him from Manchester while we were crossing the Jubilee footbridge on the way to the Eye. Later we'd heard from the police that everybody questioned in Manchester, including Marcus, had said they'd not heard from Salim since he'd left. It was an inconsistency. Someone was lying. Marcus, maybe. The police reported on Salim's friends' alibis the day he disappeared. Marcus's mum had said he was on a day out with the Scouts, so I thought maybe Marcus was out with the Scouts, the way Kat and I had gone swimming, or the way Kat was supposed to be at school that day, when really she'd gone up to town to have her hair flare consultation. I didn't know much about Marcus, only that he and Salim were friends, that they were both half Asian at an all-boys school, that they were moshers, which means casual, cool dudes, that they'd starred in the Tempest at school. Salim had played Ferdinand. Somebody must have played the only female role, Miranda, who Kat had told me was a dish rag. Maybe it was Marcus. Maybe that's how they'd had the idea. Marcus, very likely. When the girl had got off the motorbike at the scooter show freestyle jumps, everybody had assumed she was a man, until she'd taken off her helmet and loosed her long hair. Maybe Kat and I had done the reverse, assumed the person in the pink fluffy jacket was a woman just because she had long hair, male or female. It depended how you looked at it. Marcus, almost certainly. Of the 21 people leaving the pod, there had been no extra woman, no female who could have emerged from under the wig and sunglasses disguise, but there had been a lad. The lad we'd taken for the girl in the pink fluffy jacket's boyfriend. The boy with chubby brownish cheeks. Marcus, definitely. That's when I remembered Salim shaving off his moustache. If he was to become the girl in the pink fluffy jacket, he needed to be clean-shaven, as did Marcus. Everything pointed to Marcus. Then the final jigsaw piece fell into place. What the woman security guard said as we left the Earl's Court. I didn't slot it into the rest of the pattern until the 87th kick of the garden shed. Kat had asked her where the strange man called Christie had gone. She'd replied he'd gone home with a stomach bug, a bug she didn't believe in. With him it's always the same, sick this, dentist that, dead uncle the other, never rains but it pours, just like his name. Detective Inspector Pierce had mentioned Marcus's surname to us only once, but once was enough. Enough for me at least, because I'm going to be a meteorologist when I grow up. The name Flood had struck me as interesting all along. The strange man had lied to us in Earl's Court and lied to us again in Mile End. Both times he'd known more than he said. He and Marcus were related. They were both called Flood. For some reason he had helped Marcus and Salim carry out their practical joke, maybe because that's all he thought it was. But it wasn't just a practical joke. It was also part of a bigger plan, a plan for Salim to run away. Because I think everybody knew by then Salim hadn't been abducted. He'd vanished by his own choice. He'd never wanted to go to New York. A clue to this had been the guidebook in his backpack. There were no creases on the spine, which meant Salim had never opened it, which meant going to New York didn't even make him excited. But the London Eye did, and vanishing while riding it was the best and most exciting way of running away he could think of. A weather detective is somebody who uses observations and measurements to make theories. And if the theories are right, they will correctly predict weather patterns. Finding out what had happened to Salim and where he was likely to be was exactly like that. I made observations and constructed theories, and then found out more facts with Kat's help. And when the facts and the theories fitted, I thought we'd be able to track Salim down, just like you track a storm system, and predict where it will make landfall. Only something had gone wrong. Salim hadn't appeared at the end of the trail. There was only Marcus. And Marcus stood in the kitchen staring at the floor. And when everybody started talking at once to him, he started crying. His head was down, but you could hear him and see his shoulders moving. And I got a very bad feeling in my esophagus again.